Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Mesut Serdar Çekin. I'm from the Turkish German University. I'm an associated professor of civil law at the law faculty in Istanbul, in Turkey. And today I want to talk about the regulation of artificial intelligence. But first of all, I would like to thank the Humanities Research Institute for this kind invitation, and I hope we will have the possibility to discuss deeper about this topic. First of all, as you can see in my presentation, I have four parts. First of all, I want to start with some historical developments and especially two examples from the history. And the reason for that is to point out that it is not the first time that regulators are confronted with a new technology and to analyze different approaches towards technology. And then I want to discuss about the regulator's dilemma. Next, I want to talk about the question, what is so special about artificial intelligence compared to other technologies with which we are confronted since more than 150 years. And finally, I would like to present some solutions. Um, let's start with the history. And there I have two cases from the UK and from Germany. Both cases are from the 19th century, but you can see two different approaches towards technology. In the first case, we have the case of Mr. Winterbottom versus Wright, where the first one, Mr. Winterbottom, was a coachman who drove a horse-pulled mail coach, and his employers entered into a contract with Mr. Wright. And the topic of this contract was to maintain the coach and keep it in good working. And however, Mr. Wright failed to do this, and Mr. Winterbottom fell off the coach and injured himself, and therefore sued Mr. Wright for compensation. But the court rejected Mr. Winterbottom's claim, stating that there was no contractual relationship between these two. And at the same time, with the motive that it was an infant industry which should be protected against strict liability regimes. Approximately 20 years later, in Bavaria, in Germany, a train spark causes a fire, destroying a farmer's entire harvest. And the point was that at that time, according to the state of the art at that time, the formation of sparks was unavoidable. And although there was no strict liability regime in Germany at that time, and the train operator met all technical standards, the court nonetheless affirmed liability by assuming that there was a civilistic fault of the train operator. So two cases, two different approaches. The first one wants to protect this infant industry, and the second one wants to protect the people against the damages caused by this new industry. Um, this is also the next point I want to talk about. It's about the regulator's dilemma, and especially when regulating new technologies, there is the so-called Cullenbridge dilemma, which is better known in the economics. As you can see in the graphic, we have at the early phase of a new technological development, we have the regulator has a huge influence on innovation. It can just prohibit the innovation, and that's it. And at the same time, the costs will be very low. Um, and as time goes by, in the late phase of a technological development, the influence will decline. And at the same time, if the regulator wants a correction, the costs will go up. and therefore the regulator should choose at the right time to regulate, to intervene into the market, into the relationships of the market participants, um, and there is the big risk of losing potential benefits from this new technology. And I think that we are confronted with this same dilemma regarding artificial intelligence. But what is so special about artificial intelligence compared to other technologies? As I have talked before, um, we have the problem of regulating new technologies since more than 150 years. And still, AI is something new, something maybe special. There is a special risk, special challenge which should be addressed in this context. Maybe in this context, I want to um, uh, talk about the controversy between Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk. Mark Zuckerberg stated that he believes in artificial intelligence and it will have positive effects on humanity, whereas Elon Musk stated that he thinks Mark Zuckerberg doesn't understand very much about artificial intelligence. So if two visionaries, two big tech company owners have different opinions on artificial intelligence, how should a regulator act about it? And in this context, I want to give some examples where AI is used and where there are special threats for the humankind. And as any other technology, artificial intelligence also has two sides. On the one side, we have AI algorithms used to detect brain tumors, for example. They are used in hospitals, and the results are more accurate. They are much faster. Um, and they are deployed. They are being used to help people's life. Or we have artificial intelligence in due diligence sector. It is instead of spending weeks with a team of specialized people and spending a lot of money, you can just run an artificial intelligence program and have your results maybe more accurately and for low costs in a small period of time. Um, Artificial intelligence is also used in capital markets and of course in social media, but we have at the same time, of course, some negative examples of artificial intelligence. Of course, there are many negative examples, but I want to point out especially two or three of them. Um, uh, the first one would be Ocean, or better known as Cambridge Analytica, where social media accounts and information of US citizens were used to produce psychograms of these people to run election campaigns. According to the psychogram of of a US citizen, they would target advertisements to them. Which also changed the course of election, and which will also change the courses of future elections, definitely. At the same time, you have facial recognition systems, which are used especially in crime prevention processes. And we have, of course, the usual suspects, Google and Facebook, who are, especially Facebook, who was alleged to show, for example, black people other advertisements than white people. We have the example of Uber. For a short period of time, I think they used the technology and algorithm, a pricing algorithm, which set the prices according to the battery status of the user. If you had a smartphone and you was running out of battery, you got higher prices because you were in this deliberate situation and had to make a choice very quickly, and then you got a higher price than in other cases. And at last, there is this Amazon algorithm, hiring algorithm, which was called the sexist algorithm, because it was fed with former CVs, and there was a pattern that men were more likely to start to get a position at Amazon than women, and therefore the algorithm preferred men over women. And after a while, they suddenly saw that they had more men starting, getting new positions at Amazon than women, and then they just stopped it. I think that's also one of the main problems. We have an algorithm which works well, okay, but we don't know what is going on inside this black box. The internal behavior of the code is still unknown. There is not enough transparency to see according to which parameters these decisions are taken by the artificial intelligence systems. And I think this is one of the greatest challenges the regulators have to address. So for the next point, I want to go to the I want to talk about possible solutions. And at this point, I have three crucial points, topics. The first one is we don't have, or the regulator does not have enough information about background of the technology. I mean, even the developer has not enough information what is going on in this black box, and the regulator will definitely not have more information, no knowledge about the functioning of this technology. Then we have time, because if we act quickly, we will be as I talked about within the Collingridge dilemma. If we act very quickly, maybe we will be able to address these problems in an easy way for low costs, but at the same time, we will lose potential benefits. But if we wait too long, then there will be harms, damages which could not be which could not be revoked again. And of course, there's the point of innovation. If a regulator kills the innovation, then it will also has have definitely negative effects of on the economy of this country. And regarding all these factors, I want to talk about three specific points. The first one is redefining the roles between regulating bodies or regulating authorities and regulated entities. And in this context, we have the classical way of regulation, which is the command and control regulation. We have the competent authority, which commands and controls and regulates the private sector, the regulated entity. On the other side, we have the self-regulation model, where the market should regulate itself. But as you can see, regarding artificial intelligence, especially, a command and control regulation presupposes that the competent authority has more knowledge, or has the same level of knowledge about the technical background than the developer, which is just not the case. And if we just let the market regulate itself regarding the potential risks of artificial intelligence, I think no regulator take this responsibility, and therefore I personally would prefer co-regulation or hybrid models, which are not completely new, by the way. I will just show some one example of it. But in this co-regulation or hybrid models, the main point is that the private sector may have more knowledge, may have more background information about the new technology or about the sector specific features of technology. And before the states tries to control something from above, they're sitting with the competent authority at the same table, discussing about a framework how to regulate this new technology. And in this context, the private sector can share its information with the regulation body, and the regulation body can can make new regulations, can produce new regulations which are more accurate regarding the new technology. And as an example, I have here the codes of conduct known from the European General Data Protection Regulation, where it states that the member states and competent authorities shall encourage the drawing up of codes of conduct intended to contribute to the proper application of this regulation, taking account of the specific features of the various processing sectors and the specific needs of micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. And this is especially taking account the wording, taking account of the specific features of the various processing sectors. This is exactly the point of information sharing between the developers of the new technology and the regulating bodies. Another point I want to discuss about is the new model of regulation at all. It's not new, by the way. I mean, dynamic regulations are existing already, but we can make more use of it because in the classic way of regulation is a static one. You set the conditions, the regulator set the conditions, and that's it, and they stay there until they are replaced by new regulations, by new laws. But changing laws are costly, and it takes a lot of time. And instead of that, we can choose more dynamic regulation models where the adjustment of the regulation can be done in a quicker and faster and simpler way than the static regulation model. And as an example, we have a very actual example of it. I think 2 weeks ago, the proposed regulation of the European Parliament and of the Council on liability for the operation of artificial intelligence systems has been published, and therein there is an annex in which high risk imposing AI operating systems are listed in an exhaustive way. But time goes by, new technologies will emerge, and maybe we will gain more knowledge about existing technologies, and therefore the Commission is empowered to adopt delegated acts in accordance with Article 13 to amend that exhaustive list by including new types of high-risk AI systems and critical sectors in which they are deployed, or deleting types of AI systems that can no longer be considered to pose a high risk, and or changing the critical sectors for existing high-risk AI systems. So we have a beautiful example of a dynamic regulation. As time goes by, as we gain more knowledge, more information about the new technology, we can adjust our regulations in a faster and more simple way. Um, And the last point I want to talk about is the risk-based approach. And this is once again about the information asymmetry between the developer and the competent or the regulated entity and the regulating body. And the risk of assessing potential risks, harms of a new technology can at the same time shifted to the regulated entities. And the reason or the background is that these regulated entities are better able to assess the risk and at the same time are better able to develop solutions, to develop to take accurate measures to minimize the risk of the new technology to an acceptable level. And therefore, maybe this shift of risk of assessing potential harms of the technology should be taken away from the competent authority and transferred to the regulated entity. This could be one other possible solution. And this is there are different methods, and I want to give an example of the proposed regulation, which I was talking just before, which I was talking about just before. In this proposed regulation, there is a difference between high risk AI systems and all other AI systems. High risk AI systems are regulated with the regime of strict liability, and all other AI systems shall be regulated in the regime of fault-based liability. If the risk is very high, then there is strict liability, and if the risk is low, then there is fault-based liability. Um, and maybe this could be this approach can be used in other sectors where AI will be regulated. And of course, there's the I want to talk about impact assessments. What is it to make it very simple? In the first stage, we are defining the risk, and at the next stage, we are taking appropriate measures to reduce the risk to an acceptable level. And there are already existing examples. For example, the data protection impact assessment from the once again European General Data Protection Regulation, which is concentrating on human rights, on protecting human rights. And we have the US example of privacy impact assessment, which is more technical. And of course, we have the ISO 27001 standard, which is which favors also a risk-based approach and is more technical, of course, than the last two mentioned examples. So to summarize what I have been talking about, it is not new that regulators are faced with new technologies. It's not the first time, but of course we are in a dilemma. If we regulate too early, we can lose potential benefits. If we regulate too late, then the costs for correction will be too high, and maybe the technology will be accepted by the society, will be a part of the everyday life, so that a correction will be factually impossible. And this we had these problems, we have this dilemma since more than 150 years. But the special thing about AI, or the special risk about AI, is maybe its autonomous decisions. We cannot foresee all the possible outcomes, and therefore the regulators, if they if AI should be regulated, on the one side, there is the risk of over-regulation and killing all the potential benefits the AI technology, and on the other side, as I thought before, it could be a risk for the whole human society. And therefore, maybe we have to rethink or redefine the models of regulation by um, and maybe develop new models of regulation. Competent authorities should not command and control and stay above the enterprises, maybe, but and because of the information gap between state authorities and regulated entities, they there should be developed new models in according to which the information can be shared between the two, between state authorities and entities, and maybe the way of developing frameworks for regulation can also be made in this co-regulation model, in this hybrid model. At the same time, a risk-based approach will be also another important point to accurately regulate artificial intelligence technologies. Thank you very much for your patience, for your attention, and I'm happy to discuss about with you in more detail, and other questions are of course very welcome. Thank you very much once again.